Okay, Matthew Johnson, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
First, I'll ask you to just do the basics and talk a little bit about the organization MediaSmarts, and then talk a little bit about what is Media Literacy Week, that we are now marking 20 years of.
Mhm. So, MediaSmarts is Canada's Centre for Digital Media Literacy. We've been a registered charity since 1996. We're about to go into our 30th year of working to ensure that all Canadians have the critical thinking and the ethical decision-making skills that they need to understand and to actively engage with all media. And so Media Literacy Week really is the time every year. And as you said, we're going into the 20th Media Literacy Week right now. It's the time every year where we try to make sure that media literacy is a part of the public conversation, that people are aware of its importance, that they're also aware of all of the amazing media literacy work that is happening across the country. It's a time when we can really be a convener, when we can really be a showcase for the work that's being done in schools, in libraries, sometimes by other civil society organizations, by professional organizations, sometimes by the philanthropic arms of different corporations, government agencies. There is amazing media literacy work being done across the country, and this is really our opportunity to shed some light on it and celebrate the history and the present of digital media literacy in Canada.
Okay, so when we're talking about digital media literacy, um, what does that entail in terms of like, I know what this year's specific campaign is going to focus
Mhm.
on, and because I've already read about it, spoiler alert, it's artificial intelligence. But in terms of like how you're helping communities and young people and students identifying, what is I guess what is a source of information, what is
Mhm.
misinformation, what is propaganda, um,
Mhm.
that I feel like is harder than ever, because there's kind of like the walls are gone, like the walls of what used to be
Mhm.
like, you know, I I know from on very good authority there are people in this community who get their news from my show.
Mhm.
And affirming as that is, that people trust me as a source of information, that's a great responsibility. On the other hand, I also know that there are TikTok channels and podcasts and YouTube channels and
Mhm.
things where maybe people don't take that responsibility as seriously. So just in terms of like a baseline, in terms of how people identify,
Mhm.
how you help people identify correct sources of information, where do you begin?
So, what we've really done over the last few years is we've kind of rethought our approach to that. Because, if you're my age, or, even if you did go to school in, the last 20 years, you probably learned some media literacy. It is in the curriculum of every province and territory. Ontario was one of the first, if not the first jurisdiction in the world to have media literacy in the formal curriculum in K to 12 schools. The problem is that the media literacy that was brought in the 1990s and in the next decade, which a lot of people are still learning primarily, assumed that it was expensive to make media and it was expensive to distribute media because that was
Mm,
what was true.
hmm
And also that you could tell easily the difference between professional and non-professional media. And, in the 80s and the 90s, even in the early aughts, it was easier to tell the difference. So all of the skills, all of the aspects of media literacy that were taught in that form of media literacy in that time, they're still all incredibly important, right? Because we still do. Once we know that a source is worth our attention, when we're listening to your show, when we're reading the Globe and Mail or CBC or whatever, the New York Times, whatever source like that, we still have to apply our critical reading skills to it, our critical thinking. We have to look at things like bias and framing. We have to think, what are they leaving out? What's the impact of the headline versus the story? So that's the classic media literacy, and it's still incredibly important. But what we need to do now is before we get to that, we need to apply a different set of skills that tell us whether or not something is worth that critical attention.
Hmm.
And so this is a process we call information sorting, and it's got two parts. The first part is what we call companion reading. Some people who teach this call it lateral reading. It's basically the same thing. And then the second part is close reading. So close reading is that what I was just talking about, that old fashioned, not old fashioned, but that classic media literacy where we're really looking closely at those things. But companion reading is saying, is this worth my attention? And by design, companion reading is quick, easy, and fairly unambiguous compared to that close reading. So we actually have a program called Break the Fake that boils that companion reading down to 4 steps. Um, Using fact-checking tools like Snopes or PolitiFact, and we actually have even a custom search engine that searches a whole bunch of fact checkers all at once. Finding where a claim originally came from, because most of the time these days, when we encounter news or any kind of information, we're not getting it from the original source. We're getting it
Hmm.
from someone who shared it with us, or we're getting it from an influencer, or we're getting it from an algorithm
Right.
or a search engine or an AI chatbot. None of those are the original sources. So there's not really even any point in trying to verify those. You need to find where a claim originally came from. And then if you don't recognize it as being reliable or unreliable, if you know already, now that's a reliable source, or you already know that's an unreliable source, you're good. But a lot of the time, it'll be somewhere we haven't heard of. It'll be a news source from somewhere else in the world. It'll be a professional journal or a professional organization, something like that, where it's very easy for someone to make a fake website or to make an organization that maybe has 50 or 100 members and that claims to represent, all the pediatricians in America or something like that. So that's when you verify the source. That's when you do a little bit of homework, you do a Google search, you check Wikipedia, you say, is this generally seen as a reliable source? So that you can determine whether it's worth going to that next step of close reading. And the fourth step of companion reading, and you don't have to do all of those. Fairly often, just one of these is going to be enough, but it's important to know how to do all four. The fourth one is checking other sources. So having a toolbox of sources that you already know are reliable. So one simple one is the news tab in Google, which is
Mhm.
a lot better than the main tab because it's curated, because
Right.
everything that's in it is a real news source that really exists. There are things in there that I wouldn't necessarily include. I'm not saying you should 100% trust everything you see in the news tab, but the fact that they are real news sources that really exist already means you've cut out 90% of the junk on the internet. And
Right.
again, for checking other sources, that can be sources that you already know are reliable on different topics. So if you know some sources, you already know you can trust on health. If you have things like government websites that give you information on particular topics, sometimes there really is a best source. So if you're trying to find out when the next bus is coming,
Right.
don't Google it. Don't ask ChatGPT. Go to your local transpo website. That's going to have the best information. And it's surprising how many sources where there is actually, how many topics where there is a best source of information like that, but just out of habit, people will go to a search engine or increasingly to AI to get that information when it takes longer to do it that way. And of course, it's significantly less accurate.
I'm going to attack everything you just said in two fronts, which is number one is like I like having a system is all fine and good,
Mhm.
but I feel like so much of reaction to news is like emotion based. And if
Mhm.
you
Yeah.
read something and it really makes you angry, are you going to take the time, effort, and energy to take those steps to verify that you're talking about? And number two is um, there are reporters who do good work and are right like 99.5% of the
Mhm.
time. But just like through sheer human error or mishearing
Mhm.
something, or misreading something. I mean, most famously of all, I make this point when people talk to me about All the President's Men. All the President's Men ends with them screwing up the story.
Mhm.
And Woodward and Bernstein got it right ultimately in the end. But I feel like if that were happening today, and maybe this has actually happened, if this were right today and
Mhm.
reporters at a major news source like that stumbled as badly as they did in 1975, do you get to the end of the story where they are vindicated? And
Mhm.
are we, I guess, more judgmental of even when well-meaning reporters get something wrong because something is wrong?
Mhm. So, yeah, I mean, in the first case, the real reason for teaching it in terms of those concrete steps is to try to take a little bit of the emotion out of it.
Hmm.
Um, so that when we practice something, when it becomes a routine, we are less likely to respond emotionally. So there's actually a tremendous amount of work that's been done in psychology that's looked at this very question. I know you say we only have about 30 minutes, so I'm not going to go too deeply into it. But basically, there's this idea that we have two distinct um, ways of thinking, what are called system one and system two,
Hmm.
where system one is instinct. We take the shortest path possible, and it's very strongly influenced by emotion, but it's also very strongly influenced by what's called saliency, by what are the most visible, the most easily recalled examples that seem relevant to our current situation. And
Right.
that actually has a huge, huge impact. It has more of an impact than almost anything else on how we behave. And then system two, of course, is the system that we like to think we're always using. That's where we actually take time and we think through something and we use, logic or a similar system. And we slow down. System one is fast, system two is slow. And that's the famous text on this is called thinking fast and slow. So there are a number of ways that we can encourage people to use system two instead of system one. Some of it is just learning it and getting in the habit of doing it, but also learning what are called heuristics, learning thinking shortcuts.
Right.
Because what you really want is to make system two as close to system one as possible in terms of how easy it is to use. So the more you can make salient examples of times people have verified something successfully, have taken these steps and found that it worked and it's easy. Um, the times when make people recall times when either they've maybe fallen for something or successfully recognized that something was false, or found something that looked false but turned out to be true and recognize that. These are the ways that we can get people to respond a little bit less emotionally. Um, but also in our broader materials, because we do cover a really wide range of topics, particularly in our materials for schools, we look, for instance, at emotional manipulation, because a lot of the messages that we encounter aren't even making an argument.
Mm,
They're trying to engage our emotions in some way. So when you
right.
see a meme, you may see a meme that's making a point on a political issue, but it's not usually doing it through a logical argument. It's not something you can argue against. You can say, oh, well, here's the logical flaw in that meme. It's provoking emotional responses in us. So learning how to recognize when you are being manipulated emotionally um, is helpful in resisting that and making us think more abstractly. And the wonderful thing about that is that it helps us whether we're looking at memes and we're recognizing when we're being manipulated emotionally, or when we're looking at advertising and we're recognizing
Right.
when we're being manipulated emotionally. It's the exact same techniques. Um, as well, one of the things that we try to teach in a lot of our material is intellectual humility, because the real risk, one of the biggest risks of teaching verification is that people will use it to debunk things that are true and that they don't want to believe are true. And that's
Right.
one of the biggest risks when it comes to AI, because it gives anyone an out.
Right.
Anytime someone doesn't want to believe that a photo or a video is real, they'll just say, oh, that's AI, and they'll find something wrong with it. Because if you look long enough at any photo or video, you will find something wrong with it. So
Great example of
we,
that is the Louvre recent the
hmm,
Louvre guy. There's a guy in the
yeah,
background who looks like a movie detective,
yeah,
and people think he's
exactly.
on the case when it's just like the photographer
Just
happened to capture
yeah,
this guy as he was walking
just a
by.
very well-dressed guy who happened to be at the
Yeah,
Louvre. Yeah, and that's I mean that's the thing. And of course, that's where saliency comes in again, right? Because if you saw that in a movie, like there would be no chance that in a movie that guy would be there because it would be distracting.
right,
Either he is the detective or he is one of the thieves who's there to, look on his handiwork, or both, right? But in real life, these things happen sometimes. So we do encourage intellectual humility, and that is thinking about before you investigate something, you think about, first of all, what do I already think or believe about this? What's my starting point?
right,
Second question is, why do I want to either prove or debunk this?
right,
Because it's true, we don't confirm everything. Nobody fact checks absolutely everything before they share it. So if we are going to that point, if we're going to that point of saying, yeah, I'm going to find out if this is real or not, probably it's because you have some personal investment in it. So you want to think about that. And the third one is really the key. And this is what distinguishes actual critical thinking from conspiracy thinking, because the third question is, what would make me change my mind?
mm,
Establish for yourself ahead of time what would convince you. Because with conspiracy thinkers, there's nothing that is going to convince them. If it confirms the conspiracy theory, it's valid. If it doesn't confirm the conspiracy, then it's evidence of a cover up. That's how conspiracy thinking works. So if you're open with yourself, if you say, yeah, that actually, this is what would actually convince me, this is my standard of evidence, then you're being honest. You're doing actual critical thinking. And of course, that's how science works. Science is all about actually trying to disprove hypotheses.
right,
So, going to your second point, that really is, I think, that is why the idea of understanding how journalism works and the limitations of it, and the value of it, despite those limitations. That's why we teach this in the context of information sorting, where it is a two-step process, where because we don't want people to get the message that if you've confirmed that something is basically reliable, you don't have to think about it. You should just accept
right,
uncritically everything that they say. What we want is for people to go on and, with the smaller number of texts that are worth our attention, then do that close reading and maybe read another article from another source that has a different point of view. Or think about, how is the photo that they chose for that influencing me? So there's a pattern, for instance, and this has been confirmed in research, that stories about climate change are often illustrated with fun in the sun photos. So the news article itself might be quite serious, be entirely factual, may be good coverage of, obviously one of the biggest problems facing humanity at the moment. And then the photo is, people in bathing suits playing in a fountain.
right,
And that may not be intentional. I'm sure the journalist in that case almost certainly didn't intend that. Probably the editor didn't even intend that. Probably it was just someone at the news source who went into the photo morgue, or went and found they're looking for sun, and there it is. And they're not necessarily even thinking about how that juxtaposition affects how we see it. But there's no question that it undercuts the seriousness. You're reading this article, and then it says, oh, well, if what climate change means is more people in bathing suits playing in fountains, that doesn't seem so bad.
right,
But at the same time, it is really important. One of the things that we teach in both stages of that is the importance of journalistic process. That there is a distinction between what journalists do, reputable journalists, and journalistic outlets, and influencers or people who are pushing a particular point of view, where there is a process of finding and verifying information before you publish it. There is a standard of either objectivity or transparency about your point of view. And there's also a process for correcting mistakes. And that's one of the things that we stress a lot, that the fact that an outlet publishes corrections, it's not a bad sign.
Yeah.
That's the instinct a lot of people have. Oh, well, they published a correction. They make mistakes. Why should I listen to them? Owning up to your mistakes and publishing corrections is generally a good sign. Of course, if people are publishing corrections, if they're publishing 10 corrections every day, not
That,
necessarily a
yeah,
great sign.
might be a
But
sign.
in general, the fact that someone is publishing corrections, it shows that they have a commitment to accuracy. So it is those elements of how journalism works that
That
research has found are really strong, powerfully effective in teaching people how to recognize legitimate news.
the influencer thing I find very interesting, and it's like kind of in like one of the more frivolous instances. Um, I'm a big film nerd, so I'm very into film criticism, and a lot of the film criticism now is coming from influencers, and
Hmm.
their priority isn't to like curate art and talk about the, what makes that film valuable, what it makes it like required seeing if you're a cinephile. It's about I went to the premiere and I got to hang with, just to pull a name out of my hat, Chris Hemsworth, and here's my picture with Ana de Armas, and here I am in front of this, we're watching it in IMAX and you're not. And I mean, again, it's very frivolous. It's not as like dire as like climate change or
Hmm.
our election integrity. But that's a very good place to begin. It's like, what information am I getting from this influencer? Am I getting like, what is the value of this film? Or am I getting, look how great it is to hang out with cool Hollywood people?
Yeah, and I think that the issue there is that we get categories being collapsed because
Right.
that kind of thing existed before the internet. I remember shows like Entertainment Tonight that were basically like that on TV. They weren't pretending to give reviews. They were just giving you access to behind the scenes footage or news or whatever about entertainment. They weren't claiming to be critical. The difference is that a lot of times these things get called a review or something like
Hmm.
that, or the influencer will present themselves as a reviewer or a critic when what they're doing is what you're describing. At the same time, I think there are some really good independent culture critics, and one of the great things about social media and networked media more generally is that it has given opportunities for people whose voices otherwise wouldn't have been heard.
For sure.
Um, to reach audiences. But it does mean we have to be a little bit more aware of what we're looking for from a source. That if we are looking for a review, if we actually want to know that someone is going to give us a critical judgment of something, then you need to again evaluate them as a source. You need to maybe look at a few of their videos to say, well, is that what they generally do? Or for instance, do they just like everything? That's a big problem in some aspects of criticism, in video game criticism, for
Right.
instance.
Right.
You find the average Metacritic score is a couple of points higher than the average Metacritic score in film because there's just an attitude that you give everything. The floor is an 8.
Right.
Um,
Everything's a
so you want
rave.
to know,
Yeah.
do they ever give anything a negative review? Or do they ever give anything a positive review? Or do they always like a particular type of film? Again,
Right.
it's looking at the source. In this case, it's not a question of whether they're accurate or not. It's a question of, in a way, are they actually delivering a review to you? And does become an issue because, of course, online, so many things that pretend to be reviews are actually paid ads. You
Right.
actually have a lesson coming out that is, as one of the activities in it is teaching kids how to tell the difference between something that is a genuine review and something that looks like a review but is an ad, because you're spending your money there and you want to know, did this person actually review this? Are they giving me their honest opinion, or are they getting paid to pretend to review it?
For sure. This may have to be our last question, but one of the things that in particular I want to address is not just like when you get AI slop that's masquerading as news and you see the media, the social media handle and it's like screaming Eagle Patriot News, like, and you all like, if you have even a little bit of media illiteracy, you smell a rat. But if it's like your friend sharing this or somebody
Mhm.
you work with, somebody you know and trust and you have an affinity with, I imagine that probably makes it that much harder because you don't want to be the
Mm.
tut 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 guy, you know,
Yeah.
calling out your friend for sharing fake AI slop. What is the approach there then when you are in a like even in just real life IRL, you know, when you're talking to
Yeah.
somebody and they're just sharing misinformation that they get and you know that source is dubious.
Mhm.
Like how do you, I guess, gently, politely nudge your friend back into something a little more rational?
So there are really three different ways we can respond. And the one people tend to jump to is the debunk,
Right.
where you're saying that's wrong and here's why it's wrong. And it can actually be effective. But there are lots of times when we might necessarily not want to do that. If it is a friend or a family member, or if we're concerned about backlash as a result. The second option is to correct, and that's where you don't say that's wrong. You just share accurate information, and it helps to say where you got it, so that particularly if it's a source that that person is going to accept as valid. Um, and that also is very effective to just say, well, this is what I think. This is the information that I have. But the third option is just to ask a question, to say, for instance, are you sure that's true? Or where did you hear that? Or why do you think that? And what's really interesting is that that is almost as effective as the other two options.
Mm,
So we shouldn't ever think that that is really the last alternative. It in some ways should be the first alternative because it's also a lot more less time consuming for you. You don't have to go and find the debunk. You don't have to go and find the source. You can just say, are you sure that's true? Or where did you hear that? Or what makes you think that's true? And what's really important about doing that online is that you're showing anyone else who is seeing that
right.
conversation that the misinformation is not going unchallenged. Because again, we accept things, we believe things a lot of the time based on social proof, based on what we think other people believe. So if
Right.
you can puncture that illusion, if you can demonstrate not everyone believes this, you're actually having a huge impact on all of the people who witness that conversation.
Perfect. Again, this is like the tip of the iceberg. But Matthew, if people want to learn more about Media Smarts and the work you do and how they can become better informed, how can you direct them thusly?
So our main website is mediasmarts.ca. All of our material for parents, for teachers, for youth, for general audiences is available for free there. And we also have a sister site, habilomedia.ca, where all the same material is available in French. And if you want to see what's going on for Media Literacy Week or see our latest material, you can check out medialiteracyweek.ca.
Perfect. Matthew Johnson, just thank you so much for your time. We obviously here at Open Sources want to be a trusted and verifiable source for our readers and our listeners. And obviously, thank you for helping guide them, hopefully to better news habits. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.